tonight's work session of the Anchorage Assembly to order. Because we have so many folks on the phone, I'm asking the clerk's office to do a roll call. But we'll start with people in the room. Myself, Forrest Dunbar.
Pete Peterson.
Those are the two, and then we have Desiree in the room as well. So could you please take a roll call?
Yes. Mr. Constant.
Here.
Ms. Kennedy.
Here.
Ms. LaFrance.
Okay.
Mr. Perez-Garcia.
Here.
Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Here.
Mr. Rivera.
Present.
Mr. Weddleton.
Here.
Ms. Zalatel.
Here.
We have everybody but Mr. Dyson.
This is Dyson. I'm on.
Oh, great. Thank you. And we've been, note by the record, we've also been joined by Lance Wilbur, the acting deputy city manager. What is your role now?
Acting city manager.
Acting city manager. Great. Congratulations on that.
Bill's on the phone also.
What's that?
Bill's on the phone.
Oh, right. And Mr. Falsey, you're on the phone as well?
I am, yeah.
Okay, great. So I believe we're going to take up first the AO related to the emergency powers of the mayor and the city manager. Bill, do you want? Are you going to present on this, or is Lance?
I will candidly confess to you that we may have somewhat dropped the ball in that I probably should have been the person to present on this, but that was in the long ago and faraway time of municipal manager policy, and instant commander policy has been pretty busy. I will do my best now to field it. Can you give me the number of the one that we're looking at first?
Hey, Bill, this is Lance. I mean, why don't I give it a go? And if I stumble too hard, why don't you just jump in and correct me?
I'm happy to do that, but if you could tell me which number of the ordinances we're looking at. 2021. Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Wilbur, please.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the administration has been, as a result of the earthquake that we experienced in late 2018, we recognize some flaws in a couple of things. Our ability to possibly extend the date in which the local emergency could be allowed from 2 days to 7 days. We also recognize that in the event that the mayor might not be available, or the event the mayor and the city manager are not available, the administration had looked to see what would be the succession of how those things would occur and who would be those individuals. So we looked at that, and then at the same time we took the opportunity in the event that the mayor's position had been vacant and there was an acting mayor, which would be the chair of the assembly, and that person was not available, who then would be the succession in that? And it would just depend on the individual. So we tried to provide some guidance and some structure and some clarification to that. So that's what AO 2021 is regarding. I'll highlight some of the key changes. As you noted on the first page of the ordinance, we're going to be updating basically how we make notice. Instead of a bulletin, we'll be putting information out through different methods, through technology. So we're making some recognitions and changes there. The big change is currently that a local emergency expires within 48 hours, and at the time that we did have the emergency, the mayor proclaimed it 2.5 hours or 2 hours and 15 minutes later. That was going to expire, so the assembly had to meet on a Sunday. You guys did that. We extended it. We thought that a more prudent thing to do would be to allow that issuance to extend to 7 days. So this ordinance would recommend that change as well. And I think the other big thing that we have in this ordinance is the current ordinance does not describe fully what the Office of Emergency Management does. Not only what they do, who those are, and the functions that they include. So this ordinance adds some teeth to that and provides some structure. That's on the second page of 205. So there's a lot of us know what the emergency, we can see and hear what they do, but and we operate that way. But this one lays down the principles that they actually function, and many of this description comes from the job description that comes for the emergency management position. Again, the position is supported or directed by the mayor, but this really lays out that They have to maintain an emergency management program, develop and implement management plans, develop an emergency operations plan for the city, coordinate management between the departments, review those, and with all of the other departments, also be a liaison between us and the state in jurisdictional emergencies, provide some leadership on the operations side, conduct drills and a variety of other things. So this really spells that piece out in this ordinance as their duties. And then on this page 3 of 5 is really where we started to get into the conversation the administration has had. And Bill, at the time when we started this, we thought about who these individuals will be. We shared it with the other directors, shared it with the mayor and the order and the logic on why they would be in this particular order. A lot of it has to do with how we operate today without this ordinance. I'm sitting here today sort of in this role helping Bill out while he's away. But then we thought about the types of emergencies we're most likely to come into, and then thought about who would be most likely in charge. So after me, the fire chief, in the event that would be in a catastrophic physical disaster. Then beyond that, it's going to be a situation that we're in right now, where it's most likely that if the mayor, the manager, O&B director, the fire department, the next person in line then would be the health director, and then we go. And so we thought about how those steps ought to be taken. So we did put some thought to it. We did reach out to the directors in the order in which we were going to do it, and this is the administration's recommendation. On the page 4 of 5 is where I talk of where the proposal looks at the succession of the mayor and really the acting mayor. And what this basically says is that if the acting mayor, if the mayor is gone, the acting mayor becomes the chair of the assembly. In the event that individual is not available, it would be the assembly member with the longest period of tenure in office at the assembly. That would be the next individual that would take place. We did not put down the vice chair, but we just recommended that it be that individual. And then we had some clarifications from the definitions. And then when we get to page 5 of the ordinance, this is where we start talking about the dissemination of the information and then extending the days from 2 days to 7 days. Again, we learned a lot when we went through, so the section 3.80.050 talks about how we provide the notice instead of on the city bulletin. We provide it in a different manner. Then 3.80.080 is the termination of the emergency proclamation. This is once it's set in place, instead of having terminating in 2 days, we go to 7. We also allow the assembly to extend it further, and in the event they can also have the ability to stop it, to stop the emergency or to halt the emergency ordinance. So I think those are the highlights, and primarily this was drafted based on what we learned from the earthquake process that we went through. So that's in a nutshell what this ordinance is allowing. It's providing some structure to succession planning in the event that we ever run into that situation. So unless, Bill, you have something to add that critical that I missed, I'll put it over to you, Mr. Chair.
No, Lance, you did a wonderful job. I will jump in just to add first, and Lance is absolutely right. We wrote this as part of one of our lingering homework assignments from the earthquake. We could never have actually imagined the situation that we're in right now, but it does fill a gap that could really be presented by the situation we're in right now. The key thing is that the charter says that the acting mayor is the chair of the assembly when there is a vacancy in the office of the mayor, meaning the mayor is permanently gone. But there's a total lack of clarity about what is supposed to happen if the mayor is temporarily incapacitated. And we're trying to fill in that gap now. So if you could imagine if Mayor Ethan Berkowitz were to be on a ventilator for 10 days and totally unable to perform his function, but not gone, so there was no vacancy. It's not perfectly clear in the law how that is supposed to be handled. And that's part of the gap that we're trying to fill.
Thank you, Mr. Falsey. I have, yes. So I have, first I'll say that we've been joined by Ms. LaFrance on the phone. I have in the queue Mr. Constant, Ms. Zolotel, Mr. Rivera, and Mr. Peterson. Mr. Constant?
Thank you. So if you look at our current scenario that we're in, we are approximately 160 hours from when the declaration was made. of an emergency. So this whole section of 3.80.080, I can't support because we effectively as a body could, by another administration, be kept out of the loop completely for a week, told, don't bother us, kid, go away, we'll get back with you when we can. And so I think that the 48 hours is sufficient benchmark if it is in fact an emergency. Even if it's a Sunday morning, I'm willing to get out of bed on a Sunday morning for an emergency. And so I don't think I can support the second half of the ordinance. The first part, I just have one problem with. I understand the rationale and it's good, but your succession of office to mayor, acting mayor 3.80.020 Part B, the downtown single member district, as long as this continues to exist, will never be in a position to run the city according to this standard, because even the loser in a race in a larger district will have more votes than the winner in my district. And so in some ways, this continues the discriminatory practices that our municipality has long been under. So I have a little problem with that. The rest of the ordinance I can support because I understand the need for clarity and it seems reasonable.
Thank you, Mr.
Mr. Chair, could I respond to that?
Is that Mr. Falsey?
Responding to that, on the first issue, I do want to make really clear what's going on in that last section. It is not that the administration could keep the assembly on ice for 7 days and do whatever it wants for any amount of time. It's about the period in which the ordinance or the proclamation of emergency would terminate on its own, Mission Impossible style, just self-destruct. The assembly has the power immediately to turn off any order that the mayor issues under current law and under this law. If we proclaimed an emergency and you guys thought it was nuts, you could notice an emergency meeting in 45 minutes and turn it off today, tomorrow with this ordinance.
Member.
Whatever it takes to call an emergency meeting, and we can figure that out. And if we want to change those rules, I'm game for that too. The issue that we were worried about is, let's imagine we have a real huge emergency. We have a meteor that strikes the city, and we just can't get you in 48 hours together. The state law says it doesn't self-destruct Mission Impossible style until 7 days. I think that's a more reasonable approach, knowing that what we're trying to do is preventing an accidental shut-off in emergency that everyone agrees should be continued, but we just can't logistically get together to extend it. This doesn't have anything to do with the Assembly's ability to terminate an emergency that it doesn't like. On the second point, I hear you on the last rule that does the tie-breaking vote based on the number of votes you have. I'm open to suggestions. We're not wedded to that. We just need a rule that says we go all the way down the line. So what I come up with every rule that you like that fixes that. I think the way we have now, it's the chair is gone, then it's the one with the longest tenure of office, and only if you get all the way down to a tie-breaking vote. You got two people, the chair is gone, and there are two people who have the same length of office. So you then say who got the more votes. You want to change that to whoever had like the highest percentage of victory in their last election, so that it neutralizes the difference between downtown and everybody else. We don't care. That's fine.
Would cause a tie between me and John Weldon, though. What? I thought this was the 3.80.020. Isn't that existing code? Because you have amendment language in here. This isn't an S version. So is that existing code?
The 380.20, that's what you were referring to?
Right. The tenure in office and the tie that he's talking about?
Oh, yes. That's exactly in the existing code.
Right. So this might
be... It has been since 1976.
Yeah,
yes.
So this might be an opportunity then to offer an amendment and change that. I think the vice chair should be in there, chair, vice chair, then whatever you'd like to do. But anyway, let's move on. Chris, do you have any other questions on that?
I just don't know that I have been in any way comforted with the argument that basically we are like the state, we need these 7 days. We passed our approval of this ordinance within minutes, less than an hour of when it was introduced. And so I just can foresee a time in which it becomes very difficult for an assembly to have a say or be brought into the loop at all. So.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Ms. Zolotel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My comments and concerns echo those of Mr. Constance in .080. I think with the telephonic participation to establish a quorum before us. If that passes, that actually alleviates and is another reason not to extend this time of to 168 hours. My question was going to be, how was it derived? And if I hear from Mr. Falsey, it's because it mimics state law. And to me, that's just not a sufficient reason to extend it that far. If there was some very specific or some practical reason to extend it otherwise, or based on experience or something like that, I would be willing to consider something. But right now, I have the same concerns with Mr. Constant. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Okay, Mr. Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So two things. So since we've all been on point 080, I also share the same concern with the recent ordinance that was passed on telephonic meetings and quorum. It's hard for me to imagine, unless you go to the extreme that Mr. Falsey did on the Meteor, taking out half the city, then maybe under that circumstance. But I still believe that we should keep it under the automatic 48 hours. This idea that we could, if we wanted to, rescind the emergency order, I think puts the onus on the assembly, and I'd rather leave it as an automatic trigger. Second, on point 015, was there any other research on what other jurisdictions have done and how they operate when it comes to their chain of command?
Mr. Falsey or Mr. Wilbur, do you want to speak to that?
I'll give it a shot. On the first one, I would say, there's not a hill I'm going to die on, but to respond to McDowell's point and now Felix Rivera's point, the fact that you were able to meet so nimbly on this emergency proclamation should give you great comfort that if ever the mayor proclaimed something that you didn't like, you could turn it off very fast. And if the rule were that emergency proclamations never expired on their own, you would still be able to sufficiently govern them. It is true that we have to tell you and publish in the newspaper and the radio and everywhere else when we make an order, so it won't ever be a secret. You will always know. But it is also true what Felix just said, which is that you would then have the onus of scheduling a meeting and affirmatively turning it off or limiting it, as opposed to the way it is now, where we have to force a meeting in 48 hours. Like I say, it's not a hill I'm going to die on. It's not the thing I'm most worried about right now. But practically, to McDowell's question, we just mirrored state law because a week seemed reasonable. If we're looking for something, it's more of a compromise position. I'd say at least 72 hours would be nice, because I can foresee emergencies that happen on a Friday, like the earthquake, where it was just much harder to get all the ducks in a row early on a Sunday morning. If we could just have at least one more day, I'd be more comfortable with that. On the delegation of powers, we looked at other models, like the United States Congress kind of model. I didn't look at a lot of other cities because I know that our org chart is so unique to us. But in the absence of looking what other jurisdictions did, we really did, as Lance Wilbur say, canvass our membership and say, let's think through this. What happens if we're all starting to go down? What makes the most sense? And here, we pulled out the municipal attorney and the chief of police, because there are some abilities under the emergency proclamation to issue orders that have the force of law, and so we thought there should be some distance there. And so with those guys out, then we said, who kind of knows the whole municipal machine the best in the absence of the mayor and the municipal manager? And it went OMB, and then what you see here. We sort of elevated in the queue the fire department and the health department on the theory that those are the two departments who are most likely to be involved in any disaster. And then we went from there. That's my best answer for you.
Thank you, Mr. Falsey. Mr. Wilbur, do you have anything to add to that?
I don't. Bill answered. And on the second question, that was.
Thank you. Mr. Rivera, do you have any follow-up?
Nothing at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thanks for the explanation about which departments were put where, because I wondered why the police department wasn't mentioned too, but it makes perfect sense when you give that explanation. Back to 3.8080, it's hard to know what we don't know. And the cell towers may all be down. People don't have landlines, very many people anymore. It may be more difficult to get communication with members than we can realize at this point in time. So, you know, I mean, growing up in a time when communications were much more primitive than they are nowadays, I could see a time when if something really bad happened, a big earthquake or whatever, that it might take longer than 48 hours to get a quorum together.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Any questions?
No.
Okay, thank you. We've got Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the succession plan there and all the people that are listed there. I think personally I might have arranged it a little bit differently myself, but that's really not an issue, and I appreciate the thought that went into coming up with the actual plan there. But my question is in the idea of giving anybody other than the mayor the actual emergency powers, because it seems to me that if the mayor is incapacitated, then you have the acting mayor. And within that role of acting mayor, you have multiple assembly members who would be taking that position. So my understanding is it's only going to be the mayor that has the ability to release any kind of executive order during that time of emergency power. And so therefore that particular power of naming any kind of executive order or emergency power would go then to the acting mayor. So I'm really having a hard time with trying to figure out what the difference is between that idea of emergency power. The emergency power is always going to stay with the mayor or the acting mayor, whoever that is. And the manager, or whoever that person is, if they have to replace the city manager, is going to enact those powers. So what am I missing here? Thank you.
Mr. Chair, this is Bill. I think that's the right intuition, and it identifies the problem that we found, which is that the charter says the acting mayor is the chair of the assembly, or actually it just says the chair of the assembly, when the mayor's office is vacant. And the mayor's office is vacant only when the mayor is dead or has resigned or has totally moved on. When the mayor goes to Costa Rica, in the usual course of things, I am the acting mayor. I do all of the things that the mayor does. But the charter has said that the municipal manager in the usual course doesn't exercise emergency powers, which creates this confusion. There is a gap now where our current code and our charter doesn't clearly say when the mayor is temporarily down but is coming back, who has these powers. And that's the goal we're trying to fix.
Okay, thank you. So why are we not looking at how to reconcile the way that we appoint an acting mayor? I guess my whole question with all of this is you don't want to put the power of the city in anybody, the actual power to decide things and promote and approve executive orders in any other hands other than the elected official. That's where my hang-up is in all of this. So I certainly see where people would be implementing some of those orders, but in order to actually extend or permit any of those orders to go into place, that needs to stay in the hands of the elected official. So how do we do that? Because what I see here in this is that you totally bypass by the mayor being able to say, well, I'm going to designate you because I'm out of town for however long or whatever. That we need to have a better way of saying, of putting somebody in that role of potentially having to be in a position of operating under some kind of emergency power other than, and no offense to anybody who's in those administrative positions, but because this is so sensitive, so important, when something like this has to be enacted, I have a real hesitation to put that into the hands of an administrative official rather than the elected officials. So I just have I guess a basic principle objection to even the concept of giving that kind of authority to somebody that's a non-elected official. So that's my piece. Thanks.
And if I could jump in on that, I think, this is Bill Falsey again, I think that is the essential point, actually. That is the most tricky, difficult thing. And so as we were thinking through that, we were thinking about a pragmatic answer and saying, if this emergency were happening or the earthquake were happening where the mayor were in Costa Rica, would it make sense to draft an assembly member at that point who hasn't been involved in the day-to-day operations and say, we need you to do this thing, and try to bring them both up to speed and issue an order? If there were no political check on the ability to issue these orders, I think that would have to be the answer. But because the Assembly can override all of these things on a moment's notice and with no limitations, our proposal was instead to say the people who are super close to it and living with it would continue to be able to operate it, because that's just going to be how it has to work. And I believe it is how it works in the United States government. So there's a law that governs who becomes the president when the president gets shot, and it goes vice president, and then you're in Congress, and then you're in the Senate. But when the president is temporarily incapacitated, we passed that constitutional amendment only recently, and it's only been used, I think, 3 times. George W. Bush had a surgery and made Dick Cheney the president temporarily, but the order of operations there, is my understanding, it stays completely within the executive branch, so that you go George Bush, Dick Cheney, and then you're with cabinet officials. So I think the mindset there.
I love the
because,
Dick Cheney.
Yeah, he wrote a letter to his daughter or something when he was president for 15 minutes. I think you can Google
But
that if
it's
you want.
Dick Cheney. Don't you keep saying Cheney?
Cheney, yeah.
Oh, sorry. I got a lot of things going on right now.
Which he would love.
Yeah. Right.
Sorry.
So yes, I think you have identified the essential sort of rub about this, but when we were looking for models and thinking through pragmatically, how would this possibly actually work, it just seemed like this was the best that we could recommend to you.
Okay. Ms. Zolotel, you had something on this point?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Ms. Kennedy highlights a substantial difference here, potentially, which is between an absence of known duration and incapacity. I think incapacity is something that would probably be more unknown in terms of its duration, whereas a temporary absence, the Costa Rica example, I mean, in theory, there's a return ticket. And so I take Ms. Kennedy's point when it comes to an absence or incapacity of an unknown duration. I think we should just stick with the kind of previous succession, which was to the chair of the assembly. And then if we know the time, and that it's within a specific time period, I'm a little bit more comfortable with this. But Ms. Kennedy's point is taken well, and I guess I'd like to know if there was any conversation about the difference between a temporary absence or I guess time-limited things that we're aware of versus not.
No, we did not split the baby that finely because the charter had created this, is it permanent or is it temporary of any kind of duration? So no, we did not do that. And as I'm thinking through that in real time, I'm not sure I would know exactly how that would work in all circumstances. So if the mayor were in Costa Rica and we're supposed to come back in 7 days, but there had been a solar flare that knocked out all communications, and now I wasn't sure if he would be able to come back, which bucket am I in? Am I in that he's temporarily gone, but we know he is coming back, or now I have no idea when he's coming back? We'd have to there has to be a clear rule. That's the whole point of all of this, is that there has to be somebody who can do it, and it has to be clear who that person is.
I appreciate that. I'm still struggling with it a little bit. And similarly on that point, you said that the fire department and the health department would be involved because they're typically involved in the emergencies. Wouldn't the acting mayor possibly overtax those individuals because they're going to be in the thick of having their departments respond?
I don't think so, in the sense that all of those powers can be further delegated. So, I mean, being the mayor doesn't mean you're doing everything, right? The mayor is operating through all of his subordinates, and in the same fashion, whoever has become we should have a new term, not acting mayor, but temporary mayor, would have the same ability to further delegate all of those responsibilities.
Okay. All right, going down the list, we have Mr. Constant.
Thank you. This is a question, I think, for Dean, if he's around. I sent him an email on the topic. I believe under the emergency proclamation in this section of the code and the charter, we have a different set of rules for the quorum. What are the rules for the quorum establishment? We read it last week. I just can't remember.
Is Mr. Gates on the phone, actually?
Or any of the legal counsel, if there's anyone in the room.
There's no one in the room.
So we have no legal counsel. Okay, then I'm going to spitball until I get a good answer. But I believe that a quorum can be one member of the assembly in an emergency situation when everything has melted down, and then everyone else just has to provide I forget what we called it, a waiver. And but I don't have that language in front of me. But I think that the fear of not being able to get a quorum together is not exactly something that is a barrier at this time, because I think under the emergency declaration, the standard is much, much, much lower.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. And I'll remind folks that we're going to have this on our docket on Tuesday night. So certainly Mr. Gates and hopefully the municipal attorney will be there, so that Mr. Constant, hopefully you can have your question answered on Tuesday night.
It will be, but for the record, I'm comfortable with 72 hours, adding one more day. That is reasonable to me. I just would hate to be in a situation where a bullish administration decided they had 168 hours before they had, or 167 hours before they had to come talk to us. And I mean, it's like a classic paradox of executives. Like once they're granted, they don't want to share. And so it seems reasonable that we should be wise here.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Perez-Rodilla?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess the question I have is simple. Just wanted to inquire to the administration as to the timing of this. I mean, I understand we're in an emergency situation now, but can you speak to the relevance of us working through and passing this in this time? What is the reason for us working on this now, and how does that relate to the content of this this ordinance in front of us? Thanks.
This is Bill. Unbeknownst to us when we drafted this, when we were thinking through, what we were thinking at the time was that the thing that would be most helpful was to know that we had a little bit more time to find everybody in case an emergency struck. Now we've already done that. We've taken care of that. The thing that we thought was not going to happen and would be hopefully never used was the assumption of emergency powers in a period of temporary absence. I think you can think through, if we are all starting to get very sick because of COVID-19 and I'm on a ventilator and the mayor's on a ventilator, it's not clear what happens then. And so I think there is an urgency to some version of this.
Thank you.
But Mr. Falsey, to ask it clear, I think what Mr. Perez-Rodilla was also asking about was, I mean, this is not, we have two emergency ordinances, or I'm sorry, we have two ordinances related to emergency powers that are before us. And I just want to be really clear, this one was introduced and put forward before we knew we were entering an emergency situation, correct?
Right.
True. This was an overdue item from our home, from what we had learned from the earthquake.
Yeah, so it's
Yeah.
go ahead, Mr.
Yeah, I'm sorry. If I could just add that's. I mean, I guess I'm trying to understand why we're working on this now, and if it is directly relevant to the situation that we're in now, and you're saying that you believe it is, even though that it was introduced prior to us being in the situation we're in now.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Perez-Rodilla, do you have any follow-up?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Rivera?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think, thanks to Ms. Kennedy, I think she vocalized my concerns very well. And maybe I've just been watching too many TV shows like The West Wing and Designated Survivor. But it seems to me that it might be prudent that at least in this order of succession, that very high up there, the elected officials are put very high up there in the order of succession, and not to take members of the administration out, but they would go likely under, it would be sort of mayor, other elected officials, then go from there. That seems more logical to me, because we are putting potentially a lot of power into someone who the people haven't chosen to be in that position. So that's a big area of concern for me. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Falls, did you want to respond to that? Or Mr. Wilbur?
I don't have anything, no.
I'm not sure I have anything new to add. I mean, I think our position is just that because it would be temporary, that it makes sense for it to remain sort of in the mayor's column, that if the municipal manager or whomever else has received the delegation has gone completely off the rails, the mayor then fires them. Those people are all in the loop. Practically, it just seems easier to do. And there is a check in the sense that the assembly has all confirmed all these people. That was another thing that we used to cull our list, is that the only people who had been pushed in this position was they had to have an assembly confirmed position, so that everyone is sort of aware that this is a case of emergency break the glass possibility. I'm not sure there's more I can add other than what we've already stated.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Falsey. Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just, I guess, a chance to go full circle on this, considering the other comments. But I absolutely agree with Mr. Rivera that at the top of that list ought to be the other elected officials, however we decide to do that. And if we do look at what's happened at the federal level, it is the president, the vice president, Speaker of the House, and then I believe it's President Pro Tem of the Senate. And then they start going into the appointed cabinet positions, and I believe they start with Secretary of State. But anyway, with that, we ought to be able to go through 2 or maybe 3 or even 4 assembly members before we get to the point of running out of elected officials to take over for the duty of the other elected official, being the mayor. So for the very reason that we already have in statute who is supposed to succeed the mayor should that become vacant, I think we're better off just maybe defining that a little bit better so that it doesn't have to just be a vacated seat, but one to where the mayor, for whatever reason, is incapacitated. So I would be happy to support something that really shows that full succession doesn't just automatically turn over emergency powers specifically to the administration, or to administrators. And, and again, this isn't a reflection of anybody personally in those positions now. This is something that if we're going to do it, this is going to be in code for a long time. So we need to get it right the first time, not just be reacting to the potentials of emergencies that we think could possibly happen. I appreciate lessons learned kind of a thing, but again, it's really important that we don't exclude all the elected officials in this very important job of assuming or establishing any kind of emergency powers and executive orders. So anyway, I'll be working on some amendments, it looks like. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Let's see here. Sorry. Mr. Weddleton.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, appreciate all this discussion on this. A couple points. One on this 380-015 about the succession here to the various departments. And, if it were an absolute emergency and things have to happen super fast, I'm not so sure that every assembly member would have the skill set necessary to act quickly. We wouldn't know how we kind of know how the municipality runs. We don't know who to call, who, what, when, where, even how the internal communications work. And, it's not the case that any of us or few of us have run large staffs before. And I think you could end up putting someone in there who has never managed an employee before and now has to run a city in an emergency. Whereas if you go down this list, you have people who know how to run big organizations, you know, and there's a lot of value in that. And it's just temporary. One thing that we'll look at very soon, you know, emergency powers that spell out some in another ordinance that are pretty extreme. But we also have another ordinance coming that says the assembly can stop certain actions in an emergency without ending the emergency. So it actually, if this session went down to someone who started doing stuff we didn't like, we could meet really quick and by resolution say, no, you're not going to be rounding up homeless people and putting them in this place or whatever the act might be. So we do have control over what happens. But that's, so anyway, I don't have a huge amount of angst on this secession plan because we will and do have control over what happens. But I wonder Bill, in this 3.8020 secession to the office of acting mayor, if the mayor's office is vacant, the chair of the assembly fills it, and that's in the charter. If the acting mayor becomes vacant, we have this weird thing here. Did you think about making 3.80.020 in the absence of the acting mayor, the chair of the assembly becomes acting mayor, and delete A and B?
So this is the sort of essential confusion. The charter says when the assembly chair is acting, when the mayor's office is vacant, the assembly chair becomes the acting mayor. So if the mayor is gone, then Forrest Dunbar is now acting mayor. The question is what happens if he's gone now too? And that's what A and B are about.
But
well, you know, I understand that, but if the chair becomes acting mayor, he's no longer chair, someone else is chair. So Forrest then becomes incapacitated, he's on a ventilator, then the next guy, I might be on a ventilator, but...
Oh, that's true.
But you work your way through that way.
Because, and so I thought through that as well. So now Chair Dunbar has become acting Mayor Dunbar. At that point, I think what would happen is the assembly would move to reorganize and pick a new chair. So you would constantly be feeding the system with new chairs, and that's right. You could then say, I don't need A and B. Instead, I'm just going to keep saying, I'm going to keep reorganizing behind the chair to pick a new chair. Like I say, we didn't give a tremendous amount of additional thought to that, and that's why there's not a lot of line edits in 38020, but we're open to whatever you guys want to do on that front. I mean, that really is sort of your show, because in the world where the mayor is permanently gone, one of you is now the new forever mayor, and at that point, it's your show to run.
Well, not forever, 90 days, and there's an election.
That's right.
Right.
Not accurate. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have in the queue Ms. Kennedy again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want some clarification then in looking at this. My thought in all of this is asking for somebody to have emergency powers other than the mayor. So in other words, this could be before a declaration is actually declared by the mayor. That this gives the ability to someone, whether it be the manager or director of Office of Management and Budget, but this is giving power in the absence of the mayor for somebody to declare an emergency. Now, if that's not the case, then I'm happy to hear more of a clarification. But it sounds to me like that's what we're doing here. It's not just about who takes over with those emergency powers, whatever they are, but this would even include the ability for somebody to declare an emergency when the mayor is not available. So maybe Bill could clarify that. Thanks.
That is correct. You have that exactly correct.
Thank you.
Well, wait, Bill. No, I mean clarify, because I asked both things. Is this just taking over the powers of the emergency declaration, or does this also, in the absence of a mayor, give the manager the ability to declare the initial emergency?
The latter. It would allow the municipal manager or the other person delegated in the succession to turn on the emergency in the first case. And that's partly because we didn't really even think through the world in which we declare an emergency and then we're issuing all of these orders. But yes, that's the answer.
Okay, well, I appreciate that, thank you. And that makes me even that much more concerned about making sure that the ability to start that emergency declaration power lays in the ability or the authority of the elected officials first. Thanks.
Okay, I don't have anybody else in my queue at the moment. Would anyone like to text me?
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Mr. Gates emailed me and said he communicated with you that he had a response to my question.
Yep, sorry, good point. Mr. Gates, do you want to respond now?
Yes. Yes, sure. This is Mr. Gates. So the question I saw was, what's the quorum for emergency meetings if it's different than the usual quorum, if I understand that correctly. And the charter does not say, as far as I can tell, the code provision that's applicable is section 233E about emergency meetings. And it's basically, it doesn't change the quorum. It has two ways to count whether the emergency meeting is a legal meeting. It's a legal meeting if all members are present. I mean, quorum's not an issue then, obviously. And then the second part, or there is a quorum and all absent members have waived in writing or by email the required notice. And this waiver can be either before or after the time of the meeting. And we had this situation last week, or the week before on Thursday, after the mayor's initial emergency proclamation, if you recall. So it's the quorum. If not all members are there, you have to have the quorum, plus any absent members waiving their notice of the emergency meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. Mr. Constant, does that answer your question?
So, Dean, would it be your position then that you, in order to do any business, need 6 people there, and the difference between 6 and 11 is they can be waived out? Or would it be 2 or 3 and then everyone else would waive? How does that work?
It seems to me that an emergency meeting is called, and when the members appear when it commences, if you have 11, you're fine. If you have 6, or any number between 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, then you can proceed, but you need to get either before or after that waiver from the members that were not there. But if you have 6 members, you can proceed with the meeting. It's not considered legal until you have that waiver in writing from all 5 or fewer absent members.
So it is the case that if we only had 5 members present, we could not proceed even with an emergency meeting?
Yes, that's how I read it.
Okay.
And this is Bill. That's how I read it too. I think you're dead in the water if you can't get 6.
On the phone, once we pass the ordinance today.
Yeah, we'll hopefully, it won't be physically present, but they have to be present in one way or another. Although, isn't the case also, Dean, if, let's say a meteor hits and 5 members of the assembly were actually killed, or in some way other, like permanently vacated in some way, does our quorum requirement change before we can appoint anybody? I mean,
I don't think so, but the provision in charter about filling vacancies allows remaining members to convene to appoint to fill vacancies until we have a quorum within 7 days. But it doesn't really elaborate on the procedures to do that. So I think in some sort of disastrous situation or attack like you describe, that you should just move forward and feel that you have quorum and you need to proceed. You can't just stop because you don't have, I guess, it at least provides you some way to fill those vacancies to have quorum and proceed with business. I don't think that the rules should bar or designed or intended to bar the body from acting in a situation where, like you said, if there's some war attack and you can only get 5 or fewer members, or the rest are didn't survive. I hope we don't ever face that situation.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. I'd like to say, I'd like to see between, on this list of people that can be appointed to take over the powers between C and D or D and E, I would like a pre-designated cat, a feline along the lines of Mayor Stubbs, that's available to take over. Okay, would anyone else, does anyone else have any questions or comments? Okay, so we have time now for audience participation. Would any members of the public like to speak? Yes, you'll have 3 minutes.
My name is Eugene Carl Haberman. I live in Metro Valley, follow the public process. The public process is an appropriate decision made by the governing body, more like the public interest. I'd like to remind those on the phone and those present here that I continue to be deeply concerned with the failure of having an appropriate conversation with the people, the public, before you make decisions, and also discussions of such items as this. Note for the record, Wednesday you had a series of meetings in this room, several were offline. There was no place for public comment at all. You had a conversation among yourselves with no chance for the public to be heard. Also, concern is the setup that you've got. You're doing a Facebook scenario, which is alarming, and there's a question whether the public can even be able to connect on Facebook if they don't believe in doing what we call line logging in and all that stuff. You need to, I've pleaded with you for years, you need to move your meetings, particularly these, over to Lucette and have the meetings there. I realize there's a health emergency, and I respectfully am concerned along with you. But the fact is, you've had 8 years of doing the right thing, of having that appropriate conversation. And I fear that, I want to leave you with these last few seconds. Oh, I got a minute. It's vitally important that you have appropriate conversation with people. Having them among yourselves, which I continue on seeing, leads to a disconnect with the people. And the more there is a dialogue with the public, with you, the end result is when you do make decisions, whatever they are, the public will be more comfortable with decision and more supportive. The laws need to support the people, and we're right in a deep, difficult time, and it's even more critical that you have that conversation instead of moving fast with that disconnect that I continue to see. And now I'll leave you with that, and I look forward to seeing you all tonight. With 38 seconds to spare.
Okay. Seeing no other public comment, we'll close that. I'll just state for the record that we have taken extraordinary steps to allow the public to continue to participate both in our work sessions and our public meeting that we'll have tonight. And on Tuesday, we've set up a special email account, testimony@community.org or anchorageak.gov. We have not closed this meeting or tonight's meeting to the public, although we might have to take further action next week. We'll see how things go. We've been able to maintain a low number of people in any room that we're in. And so I just want to point that out for the record. And everything we've done has been completely legal, in contradistinction to the comments of Mr. Haberman, or as the people of the Valley may soon know him, or someday know him, Patient Zero. Thank you.